All right, let's pull back the curtain on something you use every single day but probably never see, the internet. Not the websites and the apps, but the actual physical thing. We're going to take a look at the invisible wires that are wrapped around our planet and explore how the information zipping through them has become, well, the new oil.
Okay, so let's start with something super simple. You take a photo, you tap send, and boom, it's on your friend's phone, maybe thousands of miles away. But have you ever stopped to think about where it went? How did it get there? We just say, oh, it's in the cloud, but what is the cloud?
Yeah, here's a spoiler for you. It didn't really go to the cloud. That whole idea of a fluffy, weightless digital heaven, it's not real. The journey your photo took was a lot more physical, a lot more grounded, and honestly, a lot more wet.
And that brings us to our first big idea, the invisible infrastructure. We're going to completely bust that myth of a wireless world and show you the actual nuts and bolts, the real deal wires and cables that are holding our digital lives together.
That's the key takeaway right there. The internet has a body. It's a real, tangible thing. It's a massive planet-spanning web of fiber optic cables running along the ocean floor, connected to these enormous humming buildings called data centers. It's hardware.
And get this, about 99% of all international data travels through these physical undersea cables. 99%. So forget satellites for the most part. Your emails, your video calls, your Netflix shows, they're all zipping through wires at the bottom of the ocean.
Okay, so if the cables are basically pipelines, what are they carrying? Well, that leads us right to the main idea for today. That stuff they're carrying, data. It's the new oil. It's the raw material that is fueling literally everything in our modern world. And you know what? The comparison is shockingly accurate. Oil is extracted from the ground, right? Well, data is extracted from our lives, from our clicks, our searches, our conversations. Oil gets shipped around in pipelines and tankers. Data gets shot through those fiber optic cables. And just like oil powered the Industrial Revolution, data is now powering our digital economy. But this is where the comparison gets a little darker. This constant extraction of data has led to a really powerful and kind of troubling new idea, data colonialism. And it forces us to ask a tough question. Is this whole new economy even fair? This quote from two researchers, Nick Kudry and Ulises Mejias, just nails it. They argue that our entire social lives, everything we do and say online, is now being treated like some newly discovered continent. It's seen as this wide-open, free resource that's just there for the taking.
So, what is data colonialism? It's this new global power dynamic. You have a handful of giant tech companies, and two countries in particular, the United States and China, sucking up this raw material, this data, from billions of people all over the world and turning it into incredible wealth and influence. And the people who the data actually comes from, they get next to nothing.
Now, as you can imagine, some countries are starting to push back against this. They're trying to take back control by building digital walls around their borders, creating these sort of walled digital gardens. But this move has some really unexpected consequences. The official name for this strategy is data localization, and it's a huge trend. We're talking about governments passing laws that say any data created inside their country has to be stored and processed inside their country. It can't leave. More than 60 countries are doing this now. And check this out. It's a fascinating side effect. Research from Yale looked at China's Great Firewall, which is kind of the ultimate walled garden. By blocking foreign apps and their tools, China actually forced its own developers to innovate. You can see it in the charts. There was this huge explosion of them building their own software from scratch because they couldn't just borrow it from abroad. They started working with other Chinese companies more. In a weird way, the wall created a boom for the local tech industry. But, and it's a big but, there is a major downside. For many other economies, putting up these walls is incredibly costly. Research shows that for every 1% you increase these data restrictions, you can see a 7% drop in trade, a 2% drop in productivity, and prices for everyday goods go up. It's a serious economic hit. And we're not just talking about abstract numbers. This has a very real human cost. Take a look at TimeBank, a digital bank in South Africa. Its whole reason for being is to give low-income and rural customers access to affordable banking. And the only way they can do that is by using cheap, efficient global cloud computing. If strict data localization laws are passed, their business model becomes impossible. And who gets hurt? The poorest people in the country lose access to banking. It basically becomes a tax on the poor.
So this huge tension between wanting control over data and needing the global internet to be open is playing out on the world stage. And it's really become a story about three major powers, each with a totally different idea for how the internet should work.
This slide really tells you everything you need to know about the current power balance. When it comes to the sheer financial muscle of tech companies, the United States is the undisputed champion, and China is the only real challenger. The European Union, for all its economic power, is just not in the same league, and that economic reality shapes every move they make.
So what we have are three competing visions for the digital world. The US model is all about corporate power. Let the big tech giants like Google and Meta lead, and push for free open digital trade. Then you have China's model, which is state-led control. The government uses the Great Firewall to control information and is trying to export its technology and standards. And then there's the EU. It can't compete on tech, so it competes on rules. It acts as the world's regulator, using things like GDPR to create a more human-centric internet that protects individual rights.
All of which brings us right back to the most important question for all of us. After all this talk about cables and corporations and countries, who actually controls your data?
Well, the messy truth is that there's no one owner. It's all split up. The actual infrastructure, those deep-sea cables, are mostly owned by a handful of massive telecom companies. The platforms, the digital town squares where we all live our lives, they're controlled by a few tech giants. And the data itself, the new oil, it's owned by those platforms and, increasingly, by governments who can legally demand to see it.
And honestly, this quote from Mark Zuckerberg says it all. When the CEO of one of the world's biggest companies straight up says his company's more like a government, you know we are in a totally new territory. These platforms have an incredible amount of power over our lives.
And so that's the big question we're left with. We started out by talking about a single global network of wires connecting everyone. But now, as different countries build digital walls and competing powers try to carve up the internet for themselves, those wires are starting to look more like digital borders. So, are we actually watching the end of the open, global internet we all grew up with? Is that idea now a thing of the past? That's something we all need to think about.